Hey everyone, welcome to another interview. I'm very excited about our guest this week. We have Stephanie Buckhanon Crowder, who is the author of When Momma Speaks, the Bible and Motherhood from a Womanist Perspective, which we're going to be discussing in groups coming up soon. She also lectures in Bible and pop culture at the Chicago Theological Seminary, and her writings have appeared in True to Our Native Land, an African-American New Testament commentary, and her published dissertation is Simon the Cyrene, A Case of Roman Conscription, and she blogs regularly at Huffington Post. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, no, we're very excited to have you joining us today, and very excited to be getting into the book. So When Momma Speaks, you say, is the Bible and motherhood from a womanist perspective. For those of us who don't know, would you be able to articulate what that means, a womanist perspective, or when someone identifies as a womanist, like what are some of the key insights you think it can bring to our reading of Bible and culture?
Sure. Womanist is an interpretive framework. It really comes from and is really used a lot in conjunction with Alice Walker's work in Search for Our Mother's Garden. And she provides this pretty extensive definition of womanist, womanism, womanish, if you will. And what she really says towards the end of that, it's really a four-part, kind of a quadrilateral definition that Walker offers. And she sort of ends up saying, well, feminist is to, womanist, sort of like lavender is to purple. Mm-hmm. Womanist is to feminist, like purple is to lavender. And so when Alice Walker really framed the definition, it was used in literary circles. It was not applied in theological frameworks. And so it probably happens in the 80s and 90s, you have this sort of emergence of womanist thinking, womanist theology, womanist ethics, and really within, the past decade, womanist biblical interpretation. And it's really a tripartite approach to interpretation. We're examining issues related to sexism, and so how is it that sex, gender constructions, the way women are portrayed, and for me, how women are portrayed or viewed in biblical texts, how do we tend to understand the nuances that are related to sex and gender as it relates to the Bible? We're looking at issues related to race. And so what are kind of the racial connotations and even sort of ethnic denotions that are happening in biblical texts, and also the issue of class. So we want to know, how does one's economic status, how does one sort of social standing as it relates to profession and fiscal grounding, how does that all come to bear in biblical texts? So it's womanism examines this kind of tripartite stool or triangulation of race, class, and gender, and how does all of that sort of come to live, move, and have its being, if you will, in biblical texts.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. And then, so following that, how did this approach affect the way you understand the treatment or the view of mothers in church or culture?
Sure. Well, social location is rooted in who we are as social beings. I go back to my own understanding and training and cultural studies. Different readers at different times read different texts in different ways, coming up with different results. Why? Because different readers come from different social loci. And so I use and approach my own loci as that of a mother. I'm an African American, yes, but I'm also a mother. And so how then do texts sort of appeal to me, speak to me, move, challenge me as relates to my own standing and grounding as a mother? So I'm interested consequently in, well then, what are biblical texts saying about motherhood? And are there ways in which mothers who are millennia apart from where I am in 2016, do these mothers still have voice? Do they still give directives? Are there tenets or lessons that we can learn from these mothers up here and now?
That's great. Thank you for that. Yeah. Well, in the book, you explore several biblical mothers. Hagar, Rizpah, Bathsheba, Mary, the Canaanite woman, and Zebedee's wife. So before we get into this more specifically, you obviously spent a lot of time with these stories of these mothers. And so I was wondering if tomorrow I could get you in a room with Ava DuVernay, who's the director of Selma and 13th, and you could pitch one of these stories and be like, Ava, I want you to make one of these. Which one are you choosing?
Sure. Well, it was also doing great work with Queen Sugar also. And so,
Mm.
a lot's going on there. I think, Hagar she's adjudicating for son, Rizpah for sons, Bathsheba is for, her son Solomon. Of course, there's Mary and Jesus. And Zebedee's wife is adjudicating for her two sons. I think if I had to sit in a room with Ava DuVernay and say, hey, let's go with this story, I would choose the Canaanite woman. Because out of all the six that I've chosen, she's the only one who's intervening and adjudicating on behalf of a daughter. Everybody else, this sort of patrilineal, patriarchal, patronormal society, it's about the sons. But here's a woman in Matthew's gospel and in Mark's gospel as well. It's about a woman. At least in Mark, it's the Syrophoenician woman, but in Matthew, it's the Canaanite woman. So I think I'd go with the Canaanite woman and what she goes to the lengths and even her own sort of self-debasing, self-effacing activity on behalf of her daughter. And I think I'd also choose her because Jesus even concedes that, you know what, you got the best of me. Here's a woman who verbally bests Jesus, if you will. So I'd want to see this story on the big screen.
Yeah, I think that's good. When both characters change, you've got a good story happening.
Absolutely.
Exceptional. Well, one of the mothers you mentioned was Zebedee's mother, who intervenes on behalf of her sons, the disciples. And now often when I've heard that text preached, either the disciples or Zebedee's mother are kind of put in a less than flattering light. They're kind of an example of, all right, these people don't get it. They don't understand the cruciform way, and they kind of miss the mark there. And now we all should learn from that. But you maybe have found something else in that story. And so I was wondering perhaps if you could unpack that and maybe that would serve as a bit of an example of what the womanist approach can bring.
Sure. Well, again, I start with who I am, as a mom, as a sports mom, a hashtag sports mom, if you will. My sons are very involved in athletics. Yep. So I spend a lot of time at athletic events. I say I live, move, and have my being, with cleats and gym shoes and jersey and on basketball courts and football fields, and tennis. So, I was thinking about this in light of games. And I think Mrs. Zebedee learns to play the game. And so there's all this conversation about, kingdom and all this conversation about this new throne and this new reign. And so I think she sort of takes Jesus at his word for this. Oh, you're talking about kingdom? Well, my sons were coerced really and compelled to follow you, and they've been with you, and, they were at the Mount of Transfiguration, and they've been with you at some of the most intimate moments in your ministry. And, I'm noticing, perhaps Mrs. Zebedee is saying that not all the other disciples were privy to such intimate moments. So I think she's learning to be a playmaker. She's learning to sort of play this kingdom game, if you will. Now, yes, she does it in this kind of, the Greek is proskuneo, that she's groveling. There's a lot of truckling that she does, almost sort of humiliating language and a language of urgency and intensity. But I think it speaks to the level of class seriousness, because her sons are fishermen, and, they're not at the top and they're not at the very bottom, but they're kind of the middle poor, if you will, and they're having to navigate their own sense of economic stability. And I think she sees this, and she's, in a society where the Romans are telling them always what to do. And I think from her perspective, it's a matter of, if you're offering a new kingdom, another chance for upward mobility, another way in which to make a play, for my sons, and hey, let's play this game, if you will. And so I parallel the story of Zebedee's wife, or Mrs. Zebedee, with the phenomenon, the sociology of sports moms. It's not just the men, but the women. We can be really intense when it comes to our children or our nieces and nephews in sports. And it is a fascinating kind of sociological paradigm and way of living when you see the intensity of these sports moms and who are out there arguing with coaches and referees and yes, learning to play the game, if you will. I think about here in the United States, we had the NCAA basketball championship, and Chris Jenkins, who actually shot the three-pointer that sort of ruined it for the University of North Carolina, but it was great for Villanova. Well, his mother taught him how to be a phenomenal basketball player. So it's just all this thinking about sports moms and playing the game. WNBA championships were just here in the United States, and Candace Parker was, named MVP. Candace Parker, she's a sports mom, so she's a player, but she's also a sports mom. And so it's ways in which I try to take the story of Mrs. Zebedee and make it live and recontextualize it for 21st century sports moms.
Yeah, that's awesome. So part 3 of your book asks, like, where do we go from here? This book is offering up and starting a conversation. And that's a question I'm going to encourage everyone to wrestle with once they've bought the book and rated and reviewed it on Amazon, because that's what you're all going to do, people.
Absolutely.
But perhaps now you could offer up just a little bit of hope you have for the book and its impact, either around for churches or for maybe young people like us who not yet parents who are reading it. Like, what are some of your hopes for it?
Well, what I try to do in the book is just, yes, take these biblical texts, honor them in the context in which they were written, and own up to, the challenges that, the text as they stand may pose, because they are indeed reflecting their own context. So, yes, biblical content as reflecting its original historical context. But at the same time, well, are there still some universal truths that transcend time, that sort of move beyond the chasm of time or the gulf of time in some regard? So that's what I was trying to do. Number one, recontextualize the biblical texts. I think number two, whether you are a mother or not, we all nurture people, or we have been nurtured by people. We mentor people. We want to be mentored. We were born of a woman who is our mother, whether we like her or have a relationship with her or not. So it's not about just if you're a mother, but, if you're a spouse or your loved one, or if you're just interested in nurturing, if you will. So I think it transcends or speaks to, rather, one's own familial status, whether you are a mother or not. And so a way of honoring family. I think, secondly, I wanted to look at these mothers, because I think motherhood is not monolithic. And so, yes, we have, Zebedee's wives and the phenomenon of sports moms. We have Hagar. What does it mean to be homeless and displaced? We look at women's shelters, and there are mothers who are there, who are homeless. Some of them are living in shelters with their children, but there are some who are without their children because the shelter won't allow the mom and the child to be together. So looking at, how do we take current day issues and put them side by side with biblical issues as well. I look at, Ursula Burns, former CEO of Xerox. Well, then what does the story of Bathsheba have to tell us about ways in which, women are navigating and negotiating corporate ladders? I mentioned Whitney Houston and how even with her own struggles, she willed everything to her daughter, Bobby Christina. And so having the wherewithal to do that. So I mentioned, yes, it's a different way of looking at motherhood, because, yes, you have Michelle Obama, but yet you have, Shonda Rhimes, who is producing, who owns Thursday night ABC television. So again, just different portraits, if you will, of motherhood, from those who are displaced and homeless to, the millionaire types, like First Lady of the United States, Michelle Obama and Shonda Rhimes. So it's just different images of motherhood. And how did I use, or my intent was to use the biblical text to reframe those different images. Even with the Black Lives Matter movement, there's a section where I talk about, what do we then do as it relates to the story of Rizpah, Rizpah, who she's the first kind of die-in, if you will, she sacrifices her life and her being for the sake of hovering over these dead sons. And so in thinking about here, Trayvon Martin's mom, Sabrina Fulton, Leslie McSpadden, who's Michael Brown's mom, Gloria Darden, who was Freddie Gray's mom, Lucia McBath, who is Jordan Davis's mom. These mothers who are kind of the mothers of the movement, if you will, well, they know about living and dwelling over dead things. And it's a similar move that, Rizpah made thousands of years ago. So again, just a way of recontextualizing these stories to say that, motherhood is not monolithic. But whether you're a mom or not, there's still this human factor that I think speaks to all of us.
That's fantastic. Yes, thank you. Well, you mentioned the Black Lives Matter movement just then, and perhaps this is maybe one of the most important political and you could argue theological movements of our day, and has a lot of resonance here in Australia. It's been picked up and or reframed slightly in Aboriginal Lives Matter, also dealing with deaths in police custody and the like. How do you feel the Black Lives Matter movement, or some of the ways you feel it should shape the lived faith of white Christians?
Well, I think, I think there's something that perhaps white Christians need to figure out.
Sure.
So I think, there are many of us who are saying, well, we're tired of telling white people what they should do. You just can't, you keep hearing these stories of, a Black man by a stranded car, Terrence Crutcher getting killed. Well, there's something just wrong about that. Trayvon Martin, there's something that's just wrong about that. Rakia Boyd or Anisha McBride, just stopping, just needing some help and ends up dying. Sandra Bland, can't smoke a cigarette in her own car. So I think one of the things is that, white people need to just have voice and figure out as well what they need to do about this, about these injustices. And perhaps it is a silent consent. If you're not saying anything, then are you signing off on what's going on? I think we have a model with the civil rights movement. Yes, there was Martin Luther King Jr. who was out front, but who did he learn from? He learned from Gandhi, and the people who were involved in the civil rights movement, many of them, yes, they were Black, but many of them were not. There were persons from various traditions, religious traditions, and racial and ethnic backgrounds who signed on. Why? Because this was an injustice. This was a human factor that was this kind of DNA flaw within America, as Condoleezza Rice likes to point out. And so it became a people movement, if you will. One of the last sort of movements and one of the last thrusts of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a poor people's campaign. And that had to do with just poverty and economics. So I think it's important that white Christians begin to figure out, and if they're going to call themselves Christian, then realize, Jesus was crucified because of treason and sedition, because he was calling the Roman Empire, to task, because he was saying that, we'll give unto Caesar what's Caesar, but hey, realizing that there was this kind of paternalistic structure, this kind of, imperial domineering structure that was in place. And so Jesus got into a lot of trouble for challenging that structure. So if people are going to call themselves Jesus followers or Christian, then we have to be willing to put our lives on the line as Jesus did.
Yeah, that's exceptional. And I think resonates with, we had Brandy Miller on, who also talked to us about allies needing to self-educate, stop asking people to explain it to you. And the great thing of the internet is there's so much out there that we can educate ourselves with. And there's so many good books. Your book, Kelly Brown Douglas's Stand Your Ground, Drew Hart's Trouble I've Seen, these kind of things. So I encourage our guys to be checking that out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So a final question. So you're a Bible and pop culture educator, and a lot of this has come up in throughout the way you've talked about the book. So perhaps maybe what inspires you to draw these two fields together, but also what's in the culture currently, either music, films, television shows, that you'd think of as required reading for Christians?
Sure. This came to, I guess, be sort of a passion of mine. I was teaching undergrad and just trying to find some way to make a connection. And so you're just trying to live in their world and just trying to find a way to make this ancient biblical text just live. And so I just started listening to music. And I was like, oh, those are actually biblical quotes, so listening to, Prince's music, I would die for you, even if you listen to a lot of Bono, there are some religious and spiritual themes there. So just really started as trying to make a connection with a generation that was, behind me. And then, so again, Prince, Bono is very good. I think even current day movies, I saw Magnificent Seven not too long ago, and it is with biblical text, biblical references. So that's another, I guess, text people should read. Birth of a Nation, of course. Story of Nat Turner and the rebellion here and his kind of divine calling to revolt in so many regards. You also think about some of the old school stuff, right? Marvin Gaye, Nina Simone, and even currently, I'll even come back this way. Beyonce's Lemonade, right? All the different phases of that. And I think one segment is named, she talks about baptism and forgiveness and resurrection. So I'm like, hey, that's biblical language, if you will. So I think it's just a matter of putting our ears to the ground and being open and listening and trying to connect those dots, if you will. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I try to make sure that it's not an eisegetical process, but it's an exegetical process in many regards. And it's fun to do.
Yeah.
South Park, in a kind of crude way.
I'm for it, yeah.
Family Guy, Jesus shows up every now and then with Peter and the kids and Lois. So I think we see it quite often, what's going on. Yeah,
those are exceptional. And well, there you go, everyone. We got you can be watching, your favorite television show, and it's all part of your spiritual development.
There you go.
So don't let anyone tell you, listen to Beyonce, that's pious. Awesome. Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today. We've really appreciated it. And I'm very excited to get into the book. Once again, When Momma Speaks, the Bible and Motherhood from a Womanist Perspective. There it is. Check it out. Yeah. It's available Amazon Book Depository for those in Australia who like free shipping. Check it out. And Dr. Stephanie Buckhanon Crowder, thank you once again.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was great to meet you.
Yes, wonderful.
On your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Great.